Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. Can you all see my screen correctly? Are you seeing Premiere Pro? Is it coming up okay?
Pretty good.
Yeah. So you've got my file menu there and right down to the bottom of the timeline, yeah?
Yes.
Excellent. In that case, let me move this out of the way so I can see. Okay. So, once again, thank you very much for coming along. I've been exploring these Boris FX transitions in the Premiere Pro environment. This is Premiere Pro CS6. And what I want to do is share with you my discoveries of using these transition effects. And a lot of my work is about taking really complicated technologies and making them accessible for creative minds. So I'm going to try to approach it very much from that point of view, that we're just going to get the key information that we need. So before I go any further, here is Premiere Pro. This machine I'm working on, for a point of reference, is an HP 8760 laptop, and it has a Quadro 5000 graphics card in it, and it's got 4 gig of graphics memory and 16 gig of system memory. It's a quad-core i7 CPU, and it's got a solid-state drive, and it's very nice, and it's got a nice high-resolution screen. Obviously, with effects like these transitions, if you're working in any nonlinear editing system, the more cores that you have for your CPU, the more memory you have, and the faster your hard drive, the better. And for what it's worth, I think that hard drive speed is more of an issue today than it's been for a long time, because we're accessing really big files, and we want to get them as quickly as possible. And just for the record, though, when we get into Boris FX, and I'm going to walk you through adding these effects and working with them, it's the previews that are affected by what's called GPU support, graphics processor unit support, not things like rendering on the timeline inside the editor. That's all done by your editing system, in this case, Premiere Pro. Particularly if you're working with things like extruded text in Boris FX, it can make quite a big difference if you've got a good graphics card. So let's have a look. First of all, here's Premiere Pro. And just for those of you that are not familiar with this system, I've got a bin at the top here. This is my project panel, which has assets I might choose to use in a sequence. Here, I've got my source monitor for looking at content. What I'm really interested in today is over here. This is my program monitor, where I look at the results of the creative work I'm doing. Audio monitors bottom right, and my main timeline where I'm going to create my sequences down at the bottom. Got a series of tools here in the middle, and particularly of interest today is this series of tabbed frames, or panels as they're called, within a frame, one of which is my list of effects. Now, the Premiere Pro effects list has this quick filter box. It's the same as the one in the project panel. And if I just type in Boris, or begin to type in Boris, you'll see that the Boris effects filter and transition effect, they just appear like any other filter on the list. And so what we're looking at here is a true plugin to Premiere Pro. And a plugin is a software application that would just work within a host environment. In this case, the host is Premiere Pro. And what's nice about the way Boris FX integrates into Premiere Pro is that it really works as if it was a Premiere Pro effect. It takes the information from the timeline. I'll show you what I mean. So first of all, I've got a sequence here, and I might as well use this one. This is just a series of images, and this media was supplied by videoblocks.com, so many thanks to Videoblocks for their fantastic media. I've taken a random selection of shots that I just thought looked really beautiful. I'm going to resize this a bit because we don't really need our source monitor today. And I've given these some handles, or I've trimmed them a little bit to give myself something to work with when I'm creating my transitions. Remember, when you're working with single track transitions in this way, you need to have some additional media beyond the cut in order to display that media during the transition effect. So let's have a look at the Boris effects. What we're going to do today is we're going to start off with applying a standard template effect, just so you can see the workflow. It's very straightforward. Then we're going to see what it's like to modify that template and produce our own Boris FX filter file that we can share between systems. And then we're going to create a transition from scratch. And it's pretty straightforward to do. Let's just pick a couple of shots with really obvious visual differences here. This is probably a good option. I'm just going to zoom in a little so we can see the timeline nice and clearly. And over in my effects list, I'm going to choose Boris FX 10 transition. I'm going to drag this in between my clips. Now, in Premiere Pro, if you apply a transition by dragging and dropping as I am now, you can specify whether the transition is aligned to the tail of the outgoing clip, which is the way I have it right now, or right in between the two, or at the beginning of the incoming clip. I'm going to go in between the two, and you'll notice that this transition effect is a little tiny clip segment in its own right. If I want to, I can click and drag and resize this and change the duration of it. And if I now go to my Effect Controls panel, you'll notice that the Boris Effect transition appears in here like any other set of effect controls. Now, just one little note. If I select a clip, I get the settings for the clip. If I choose the effect itself, the transition, I get the settings for it. You can actually double-click on this, and it'll take you up to the Effect Controls panel. Now, before we get into the Boris interface, I really want to just draw your attention to a little thing here. Notice that I can modify and adjust the duration of this transition effect in this little model of the transition up in the Effect Controls panel. Just to differentiate, we've got an Effect Controls panel and we have an effects list. So it's the Effect Controls panel we want. If you don't have it, if you're following along, it's under the window menu. So just to draw your attention that I can specify things like the midpoint of this transition. And this information is going to be taken by Boris FX when I open up the interface. It's actually going to take this duration and start and end time and use it within the Boris FX application. To get access to Boris FX, I'm going to click Custom. And this is going to take me into the full-blown advanced mode for Boris FX. Just to introduce the interface, just to let you know what you're looking at, first of all, we've got a series of controls at the top left, and these are in tabs. So I've got lots of different options for things that I can modify for the item I have selected. And in this instance, right now, the item I have selected is my video 1 clip. This is my outgoing video clip. If I choose video 2, I get options for my incoming video clip. Right now, nothing in particular is happening. If I drag through this timeline on the right, you'll see that I'm just seeing the outgoing clip, that beautiful landscape with the sun. I don't know if that's a sunrise or a sunset. I'm going to say it's a sunset. I've got a series of buttons that are shortcuts to features within the application here at the top of the timeline. And as you can tell, if you're not familiar with Boris FX, there's quite a lot of options here. This could be seen as quite a complex interface for people who haven't read the manual, they're not too familiar with it. But I'm going to show you the easy way that you can work with this. First of all, top right, I have a monitor, just like Premiere Pro. And in here, you see I can zoom out and zoom in. Now, you'll notice that if you zoom out and zoom in, if you look just at the bottom of the monitor here, I'm getting even percentages for size. And that's partly because when you're looking at special effects work, you really want to get an even share, fraction, I think is an even fraction of the pixels. 100% is best, but I don't have a monitor big enough to show me that. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. If I go to my, where is it now? I do have an option to change my view. Here we go. Under Preview, I've got a scale option, and I can choose Fit. And this is just going to scale, in this case, to 51.2%. So you do have that option under the Preview monitor, the Preview menu. And of course, you've got a series of other options along here to do with advanced controls within Boris FX. But the truth is, we don't really need to work with that right now. We don't need any of these menus. We're just going to go into the template mode. Just by the by, before I get there still, notice that when I have my video layer selected, I've got these controls, and these are giving me my X movement and Y movement and Z position. You can click and drag on these. If you've ever worked with Adobe After Effects, it's very, very similar. Just press Control Z a couple of times to come out of that. So if I'm not mistaken, I didn't make a note of the keyboard shortcut here. I'm probably going to choose the wrong one, but there is a keyboard shortcut to toggle these between, oh, here we go, W, E, and R. It is W, E, and R. But on my machine, it's decided not to work. But the W, E, and R keys should give you your rotation. No, that's not working. Your rotation and scale controls. You've got rotation, zoom, and translation that you can switch between. I'll maybe come back to that later, but I'm pretty sure it's the W, E, and R keys. So now at the bottom of my timeline, at the bottom of my panel here, you see that I've got a timeline tab and a library browser tab. Now, if you first install Boris FX, you might not see the library browser. I'm just going to close it by clicking on the little dot here. And back in the timeline, notice that at the bottom right, I have a cancel and apply button. So just make sure you're familiar with these because this is how you get back to Premiere Pro. Still, I'm going to go to my window menu, and under window, I'm going to choose library browser. And this is probably a good time to mention that if you're working on Mac or PC, it really doesn't make much difference. Here, I've got Control 9 as a keyboard shortcut for the library browser. On Mac OS, of course, that would be Command 9. But the Control key and Command key are most of the time interchangeable on Mac and PC. Now, here in my library browser, if I just twirl down this disclosure triangle and just scroll down a little bit, I've got a transitions category. If I just scroll down, you see I've got a series of standard transition effects. And I've got things like light ray transitions. Now, at the moment, I'm seeing these templates in the context of the advanced interface, which is probably more buttons than I really need. So what I'm going to do is click down here to switch Boris FX from the advanced mode into template mode. So first of all, you'll notice if I click this, now I'm not sure how well this is going to redraw if you are seeing this through our screen sharing. I'm getting an imperfect redraw on my screen, but hopefully you can just see my desktop behind this. And now you can see I can switch to advanced mode and switch back to template mode. And Boris FX will remember which mode you choose. So if I come back into the interface again, which I'm going to do in a moment, I'm just going to get this canned transitions and effects browser that I can throw onto my timeline. Now, right now you'll see right away I'm getting animation here, and you can probably see that it's the wrong thumbnails. These are not the shots that I'm working with right now. I'm just going to click to stop the playback. There's a couple of things to mention. First of all, of course, you're looking at my screen via the internet, and you're probably getting, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 frames per second. It's going to be very choppy, and you're not going to see how smooth and fluid this is if I'm compared to what I have on screen. And the other thing to mention, of course, is that we're looking at old versions of the media. And the reason that we're getting that is for performance purposes. Rather than regenerate these thumbnails every time you go into the application, we're getting whatever was used last time, and there's a way to reset them. And I'm going to show you how that works. So first of all, let's see if I've got, here we go. I've got some that have not yet been turned into thumbnails. And you can see I'm in my library browser, and I've got a little preview quality button right here. I've also got a play button, and if I choose play, I get a little animation. So if I choose one of these transitions, you can see there's my radial wipe from the center with rays. And I'm getting that previewed pretty fast, and it's actually very, very smooth on my screen, even if it's not coming across the internet that way. So that's this little play button at the top of the stack of presets. Next over, I've got a button that will generate the thumbnails for these effects. And next to that, I've got a button that will cause those thumbnails to animate. So I'm just going to click to generate the thumbnails. It's pretty quick. It's a pretty fast process. And while it's doing that, just notice the .bfx on the end of these preset names. And you can see it up here as well, .bfx. These are Boris FX preset files. And ultimately, everything that we do with the template browser is done based on these .bfx files. And in fact, if I just put on screen here, because we're going to come back to this a little bit later, this is that list of files. So you see right now, I'm in the Radial wipe transitions category, And if I go into transitions, you can find this very easily. It's in the Boris FX install directory, keyframe libraries, and then you've got the library. And within that library, you've got a series of categories. And here within my transitions, I've got my radial wipe transitions. And there we are. I've got my, which one did I choose there now? Radial wipe center ripply raised distortion. That's got to be that one. And so this is just a file. And what's important about this being a file is that if I like it, and particularly when we get into the territory of modifying these presets and generating our own, I can email this to you. So say we're collaborating on a project and you do some effects work and I say, it's pretty good, but I've modified the preset. Let's use this as our in-house preset. You can email it backwards and forwards and you can share it on an intranet. I was recently working a lot with Euronews, where if you've ever seen the Euronews look and feel, there's a transition effect which is based on a glow and a lens flare. And so they have this standard preset look and that gets passed around all the editors for use in all of their news programs. This is something you can do very easily with these files. And by the way, they are Mac or PC. It makes no difference whatsoever. So here I am now. I've got my thumbnails and I can now toggle off and on the playback of these thumbnails. And you'll notice that if you single click, and it's very important to be clear when we're making selections or applying selections, a single click is for selection. A double click is for application. So if you're a Star Trek fan, the double click is the make it so option. And the single click is just for selecting. So here I can choose to see an individual thumbnail. And let's say, well, let's go for that particularly interesting radial wipe center ripple raise distortion effect. I just need to select it, or in fact I can double click. I'm going to click apply. That's going to take me straight back into Premiere Pro. And now if I just scrub through here, I'm going to go fairly slowly. It's not probably worth rendering this and showing you it at full frame rate because I don't think that's going to translate across the internet, but you can see that transition effect has now been applied. Very easy to do. Now, let's scroll on a little bit along the timeline and choose another couple of clips. So we've got some clouds and we've got our trees. Once again, I'm going to go to my Boris effects. I'm going to drag and drop this transition between these two clips. And now I'm going to select this transition effect and I'm going to choose custom. And you'll notice once again, I'm straight back into this floating panel, which is fantastic. I can now scroll between these and choose to produce another effect. But I've got a slight problem here because if we look at my transitions, in fact, let me go to a different, much more obviously, noticeably different bit of media. So this is all the wrong aspect ratio. Let's choose, here we go. This is really obvious. So I've got completely different content. I've got this lovely deep pink red sunset and I have some clouds. So if I now put my transition effect on here, I'm just dragging and dropping, excuse me, select the effect, go to custom, I'm still getting those old thumbnails. So here's the magic keyboard shortcut to allow you to reset these thumbnails. Let me just stop the playback there. So I want to update these. And again, the reason I don't want to have them update automatically from the very beginning is that it's much more efficient to just bring up the window and see them and choose them based on my previous experience. Otherwise, I'm going to have to wait every time I go into the user interface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press Shift and the U key. And this key unlocks the option to reset. You see, I've got ungenerate thumbnails. Now, originally this button had a plus symbol and the little thumbnail icon. Now it's a minus and it's saying ungenerate, which I think is a cool name. I'm going to click and it's now deleted all of those preview icons. So now I can click on the plus symbol again and generate the thumbnails, and this is going to rebuild them using my current shots. So if I want to, I can see them in context and see them animated. So that just takes a moment to complete. Okay, and again, now I can animate these. And I can say, okay, that's the one I want, click apply, and now I'm back into Premiere Pro. So using Boris FX as just a standardized transition effect within Premiere Pro is super simple. There are just a couple of things you need to be aware of. Make sure when you go into the interface, if I go back to advanced mode, make sure that you have this library browser visible, which is under the window menu, and make sure that you know how to switch into template mode or back to advanced mode. And make sure that you know within the timeline, if you're in advanced mode, that you know where this apply and cancel button, where these two are. So let's say, let me just go into this transition effect again. And let's say I think this is fantastic. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit in this preview monitor. And I think, yeah, you know, that's a really wonderful transition effect. But I'm going to select this BCC raise, Boris Continuum Complete Raise Puffy 1, which is at the top of my timeline. And you'll notice that just like selecting a video layer, if I select this layer, this effect, I've got some handles on screen. Let me just go back to my preview and set this to fit. Let me go back in. Oh, now just by the by, just to show you where I got caught out there. Notice that I do have access to the scale control now. But if I choose the timeline panel and go back, you see all of these options are grayed out. And that's because when I have the timeline panel active, and you can tell because there's a kind of a yellow outline, it's a very thin line around that panel, I have the wrong panel selected for this menu to be meaningful. That's why it's gray. If I click into the composite panel, now I can go in and choose this fit option. And I like to draw people's attention to these kinds of issues because I know when you're first learning a new interface, it's the kind of thing that just has you scratching your head and taking an extra tea break. So, okay, let's make an adjustment. I'm going to, let's just pick one of these keyframes here, which is part of the duration from the beginning to the end of this transition effect. And again, just so we're clear, within this timeline panel, the left to right, the horizontal axis of this timeline represents the total duration of my transition, which I think by default, because I never modified it, is 1 second. You can see I've got a frame count along the top. So this duration will vary depending on how long you make the transition inside of Premiere Pro. Now, within this timeline, each of these horizontal lines represents some settings for an item. If I just flatten video 1, you see I don't really have any keyframes for these video layers. Video 1 is the outgoing clip, the previous clip. Video 2 is the incoming clips, the next clip. But I do have little marks at the very beginnings and very ends. And if I click, for example, on video 1, you'll see that, let me see if I can just show you this with my, maybe my video 2. Let's make sure I've got that selected. Well, maybe I'll show you with the puffy raise. Anytime you see a dot on these lines, that dot represents a keyframe. And a keyframe is simply a moment in time with specific settings. So at the moment, if I select this keyframe, you'll notice that my playhead, this red line, jumps to it. And now, because I've got my raise selected, I've got this widget in the center. I think someone referred to this also as a gimbal on screen of options that relate specifically to that item. When we were choosing video layers, it was position. When we're choosing this, it's giving us things like the ray length. And if I just click and drag to adjust this so you can see the result, yeah, maybe if I make this a really obvious, highly intense set of rays, you can see I'm modifying on screen very, very easily the settings that are applied at this moment. Now, at the end of this, I'm going to have no rays displayed whatsoever. And if I want to, I can click anywhere I like in the timeline and make another adjustment. Maybe I'll move the whole thing over and make an adjustment there. Actually, it looks like that's, no, it's taken it. It's given me my adjustment. And now it's going to work out towards the end, and I'm going to go into my second piece of media. So let's say I think this is fantastic. I'm very, very happy. I've made a transition effect that is exactly perfect. And now what I'm going to do is save this out as my own preset effect. So I'm going to go to File. This is within Boris Effects. And I've got a few options for saving settings. Now, I don't want to save over the VFX file that I'm using right now. I'm either going to save as, which is going to give me a new separate file, or I can save a copy as, which will mean I'm going to save a copy, but I'm going to keep using the original file. So these two are very, very similar, except that in the case of save as, you start using the new file. In the case of save a copy as, you keep on using the old one, and the copy is there as a backup. I can also choose to save this to the library automatically. Remember, my library is here. It's my library browser. I'm going to do this the long way around. I'm going to choose Save Settings As, and I'm going to make a folder on my desktop. And again, if you're working on macOS, this would be the Finder. I'm going to call this folder Amazing Effects, because all of my effects are amazing. And I'll call this something like, let's call it Raise Extraordinaire. I think that's how you spell that. And I'll click Save. Now, if I bring up Windows Explorer and bring up the desktop, and again, this would be the Finder on macOS, and I go into my Amazing Effects folder that I just made, you can see there's my Raise Extraordinaire Vfx file. Now, there's one issue here. If I go back into Boris FX, you see I can open settings, and that would allow me to browse to the file that I've just created. This is just like opening or closing or saving any other kind of document that you might work with. But if I go to the library browser, I can't see the effect. In fact, let me go to template mode here. Excuse me. In template mode, how am I going to find that amazing effect that I've just created, this Raise Extraordinaire? Well, if you look at the top of the list in the template browser, in this library, you see I've got a drop-down menu. And the drop-down menu is telling me the location of the default folder. Now, this is particularly important, I think, on a Mac, because I tried this on a Mac, and it came up as, I think it was in the library, so it's a hidden directory. You need to be able to access your library to access your VFX files. This is the default folder, so if I click Use Default Folder, it's just going to take me straight back to the same location. It's just collapsed the list there, but I can pull it down, and you can see I've got all of my effects. Let's find one that has thumbnails already. There we go. But if I want to, I can also choose a folder. So again, I'm in my library browser. I'm choosing folder. I'm going to go to my desktop. And on my desktop, I'm going to choose that Amazing FX directory. And I'm going to come up to a gotcha now. So I'm going to click OK. And there's nothing in there. And the reason there's nothing in there is that the library browser needs to have a folder name as a category to look inside of. It's not enough for you to browse into the folder that contains the VFX files, because the library browser is designed to honor any folders that you have as subcategories. And this is very easy to fix. I'm going to go back into my folder in Windows. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose New Folder. And let's call this Amazing Transitions, because I might put some regular effects in there as well. And I'm now going to drag and drop. Now, all I've done here, by the way, if you're not super confident with your operating system, is I've made a new folder. You can do that with a button on both macOS and Windows, and I've given it a name. There's nothing special about this. It's just a folder on my hard drive. And now I'm going to drag and drop this Raise Extraordinaire VFX file into that folder. Okay, so I'll double click to go into it. You can see the effect. If I now toggle back over, and I'm alt-tabbing, but you could just click back over into Boris FX, you'll notice that initially I don't have access to it. And that's because the library browser needs to refresh to discover the folder. In fact, I can do this by just clicking back to advanced mode and going back into template mode. And you might have seen there, if you're really quick, there's my Amazing Transitions category. It's the only one I can choose because it's the only folder in the it's the only subfolder. And there's my Raise Extraordinaire effect. Once again, I can build the thumbnail, and there we go. I've now got my animated, personalized effect. So just to recap, I've gone into the templates list in the library browser. I've chosen a standard template. I've applied that standard template. I've modified it, and then I've gone to the file menu, and I've chosen, let me go back in here. I've gone to File, and I've saved it out. I need to do this in advanced mode, but if I double click and go back into advanced mode, well, let me see if I can, yeah, there we go. So I've now applied that I'm happy with it, and I've saved that out, and I can import it and reuse it again whenever I like. But notice in the library browser, remember I'm in advanced mode now, so the library browser becomes a tab next to the timeline. Notice when I'm in here that if I look in this folder, the current folder I'm looking in is my users HP Desktop Amazing Effects. I can go back to my default folder anytime I like, and I'm going to get the original list of presets. So easy for you to choose a folder and easy for you to go back to the default one. Another little thing to note before I go on with generating a transition effect from scratch is that the presets that you apply, these templates, all they do is work with native standard options that exist within Boris FX. So you'll notice that this raise puffy effect, it's, let me see if I can find it. Here we go. It's under the filters menu because you can apply this raise effect within Boris FX as well, just as a video filter. Remember, you've got a video filter option as well as a transition option. And all that's been done is this raise puffy effect has been applied with some existing keyframes, which are applied relative to the duration of the clips that you have. And in this case, the duration is taken from the transition length that we put into the timeline in Premiere Pro. And it's just been pre-built to have that animation. So again, if I zoom out a little bit, we've now got our animated transition effect. And we are just working within the controls that exist already. I can go into, if I select this raise puffy layer, I can go into my tabs and modify this. Maybe I'll, well, this is based on an image, isn't it? Maybe if let's have a look. Maybe can I extend the raise? Maybe not while it's set to. Yeah, I can modify this a little while I'm here. Maybe add some textures. Oh, it's taken from the template. But once it's applied, you can learn how Boris FX works by looking at the controls, looking at the way they've been set up. Here, I've got a gradient and I've got texture intensity, all these things that I can modify if I want. And so it's just a really good way to come into learning Boris FX and using it to see the ways that these templates have been created. So if I'm happy with that, I can click apply. Wow, that's my, actually, I kind of like that. That's kind of nice. There's my transition. And let's just try, if I modify the duration of this, you can see there it is. And it's going to transition across, and notice that it's updating the duration. I'm just dragging through here. And coincidentally, if I go back in, so I've just got my transition selected on the timeline in Premiere Pro. If I go back into custom, notice that within this, now I don't know how well this is going to translate across the internet, but if I press the space bar, you can see these yellow marks moving across the top of the timeline panel. This is just pressing the space bar. It's just, actually all I've done is I've pressed play using the keyboard shortcut. And this is now buffering. This is filling out a buffer inside of Boris FX so that I can watch the playback. I can watch a preview. So now, there it is. It's going to loop back around to the beginning. And excellent. So now we should be able to play. So again, I don't know how well this is going to translate across the internet, but take my word for it, it normally plays pretty well. Okay, so now that we've added transitions from a template, and we've taken a template and we've modified it, let me click apply on there. Let's have a go at generating a transition completely from scratch. Let's take this Eiffel Tower. If anyone has seen the Eiffel Tower, there's a lovely park here. People can sit out, perhaps not at the moment. It's a little bit cold, but it's a lovely area. And we've got this fantastic zoom. Again, I don't know how well this will play for you, but this fantastic zoom across a landscape. I'm going to go back to Boris FX. And remember, I've already got Boris typed in here. So it's coming up for me on the list automatically. It's just appearing under the video transitions category under Boris. And I've got my transition item. I'm going to drag and drop this on. I'm going to resize by clicking and dragging in the timeline, selecting it, and I'm going to go into custom. Now this time around, instead of going to my library browser and applying a template, I'm going to stay in the timeline and I'm just going to make some changes to the interface right here. There are lots of different ways I could do this. I'm going to start off with an especially simple version so you can see what goes on and you can play with this in your own time. So first of all, I've got my video 1 selected. With my video 1 selected, if I click into my controls panel, I'm getting the controls for video 1. And what I'm interested in particular is opacity. Opacity controls how visible the layer is. So a lot of times this will be called something like alpha or visibility or transparency. Doesn't really matter what it's called. You've got a slider control or a percentage control where at one end it's visible and at the other end it's not. So I'm going to go into my timeline. I'm going to check at the beginning here. If you notice, next to video 1, I've got a number of different buttons, but one of them is a little eyeball, a little track visibility button. And if I click this, you can see that's my incoming shot is the Eiffel Tower, and my outgoing shot is this fast-moving landscape. So, I have a note here from Peter. Preview to RAM is also an option. There we go, different play button. So, okay, there is an option to do a RAM preview as well, and that'll give you a better quality playback. I suppose that's another one of the play buttons here, but we can do that too. Oh, there we go. It's preview to RAM is real time after it caches the frames. Thank you very much, Peter. So if I want to adjust the opacity, and let's say in this case I'm going to go, I don't know, maybe a little bit of the way through, I'm going to allow this to stay visible for part of the clip. And I'm now going to just click and adjust the opacity. And you'll notice that when I do, I get a little icon that tells me I've got an ease in, ease out keyframe. If I just expand my video 1 and maybe here you go. If we look down under our transformations, you can see that I have a keyframe now set up for my video 1. So now, and it's set at 100%. So if I go back to the beginning, I've already got the opacity set to 100% there. And maybe if I go forward a little bit, let me select the layer here again. I'm going to add another keyframe. In fact, let's do this at the top level. I'm going to click and add ease in, ease out keyframes. And just to explain, each of the options on here are different approaches to keyframing. So we can set a constant, hold, linear. Ease in, ease out is going to give you a smooth adjustment. So on this keyframe, I've got opacity 100%. At the beginning, also opacity 100%. Right over here, I'm going to set my opacity to 0. And also for the end, I'm going to come out of the video a little bit early. So now, if I drag through here, you can see I've got a very simple fade out, and it's going to dissolve into displaying the background video. If I want to, I don't just have to do simple things like opacity. I could also do things like, well, actually what I could maybe do is turn on my scale. Notice that these two are linked together by default. I can break the link. It's very subtle, but there, my X and Y are separated. Now they're connected. And I can maybe set this to zoom out a little as it's moving through. So I've got 100%. In fact, let me click here. I'll add another keyframe, ease in, ease out. Set this. I'm just clicking and typing as well. You can click and drag these controls, or you can click and type. So I'm going to type in 100, tab out of that. I've now added a scale keyframe as well. So from this point onwards, it's going to scale up and fade out. And then, in fact, it's zooming back again but it's transparent anyway, so it doesn't matter. But you can see from the wireframe, that's what's happening. And now I've made a transition. And if I'm happy with that, I'm happy with it and I'm done. That's okay. But if I want to, I can go up to my filters menu and maybe I'll go to my lights and maybe I'll add some, let's add some streaky rays to this. So now I've got streaky rays. And these streaky rays are part of my effects. So now if I choose these, I can modify maybe the intensity of those rays. And again, I can start to adjust things like the style, the colors that are used. And I can use my filter effects as part of my transition. So you really can build complex effects. Maybe if I choose, let's try tighten extend here. Well, that's kind of a fantastic glow effect to remove my original video. Okay, so again, you get the idea. I can select my individual video layers and I can modify them to generate my own tumbles, my own scales, my own opacity adjustments. I can also go to filters and apply filter effects that are also keyframeable and have them animate. Now, of course, once again, if I want to, I could save this out. So let's save this as, let's put it in our amazing transitions. Let's call it something unforgettable. I think that's right, a single G. And now I've got my preset, which will also appear in the library browser if I choose that folder on my desktop. There we go. Notice I need to build this thumbnail, and there it is. So if I'm happy with this, I can click apply, and now I've got my purely custom-made transition effect, which is quite extraordinary, inside Premiere Pro. So a couple of things to note. First of all, what I'm talking about here are these Vfx files. I can probably bring these on screen, and they're easily transferable. And in fact, there are, I think somebody already mentioned this in the chat, there are a lot of presets available. If I just pull on screen here so you can see, here we go. You can see that we've got Ice Cream Factory producing a lot of additional transition presets. There's title animations, text templates, lower thirds, and you can see these are pretty cost effective. You see here we've got the DVE transitions, $49.95. I'm just looking at the Boris FX website here. It's very easy to find these if you go hunting on the Boris FX website, and you can see here on the Ice Cream Factory website as well. They've got tons and tons of these. Here we go, 100 essential transitions that are compatible. And there's our DVEs. So if you go looking for them, once again, I have to say, as a filmmaker, I'm amazingly lazy, tremendously lazy. And I'm a great believer in using presets and templates that I can then modify, which you now know how to do. And working with these very cost-effective presets and templates generated by third parties can make that a bit more diverse and a bit more interesting. So the key takeaways from this presentation are that Boris FX plugs into Premiere Pro. It behaves like any other transition effect. If I clear my filter, you can see under Video Transitions, under Boris, I've got a Boris FX transition item. Notice that this is a single track transition effect. Boris FX is able to take both the outgoing and incoming clips and blend them together and use them within the interface. And that's quite unusual because a lot of plugin systems, they force you to do this. You'll have to, in fact, let me show you here. You have to take a clip, put it on the timeline, put that on an upper video track, take another clip, lay that down underneath it, and then you're going to use keyframing within the upper clip to apply your transition. It's not really using both items together, and Boris FX will do that very, very conveniently because it truly integrates into Premiere Pro. Another big takeaway from this is don't forget you need to click the custom button to get access to the controls, and make sure you've got the library browser visible, which is under the window menu, so that you can get access to all of these beautiful presets. If you get any weirdness within the application where the menus don't do what you expect, make sure that you have your correct panel selected before you go looking in your menus. Remember the preview option that won't let me scale because I don't have the correct panel selected. Another big takeaway is that using these templates, using this template mode makes the panel a floating panel that you can access at any time. And of course, if you do make a custom transition effect like my unforgettable one, or perhaps my raise extraordinaire, you can just email them to people to collaborate. Okay, that's my presentation so far. And I think that was pretty much all I wanted to show you. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add or ask?